Normally I cut my own hair. I use a household electric clipper. Nothing fancy. Whenever I give myself a trim, I take the clipper and a convenience store bag into the bathroom. After cutting, I gather up the fallen strands of hair and sweep them into the bag to throw away. It's become my routine. The other day I followed that same routine. I clipped my hair, brushed the short pieces together, and stuffed them into a plastic bag. Then, without thinking much of it, I tied the bag lightly and set it on top of the handrail at the corner of the bathtub while I rinsed off. And then I just forgot about it. Every day I shower, but my eyesight isn't great without my glasses, to be honest. And I'm lazy. For days I just left that bag sitting there in the bathroom, out of sight, out of mind. About a week later, I finally noticed it again. When I stepped into the shower and I thought, right, yeah, I should throw that out. But something was strange. My hair was always kept short, so whenever I cut it, the clippings were tiny, maybe 2-3 centimeters at most. That's all that should have been in that bag, and yet the plastic bag wasn't small anymore. It was puffed up, swollen tight, like it was full to bursting. The black mass inside pressed against the plastic, straining at its sides. I frowned and I untwisted the knot. Inside was not the few centimeters of hair that I had trimmed. It was long, glossy black strands, thick and tangled, coiled together in loops like someone had wound them deliberately. There wasn't just a handful either. There was a massive amount, far more than I could have ever cut from my own head. The entire bag was packed with it. Black hair. It made no sense. It shouldn't have been there. The longer I stared, the less I wanted to understand it. The smell of damp plastic, the faint, stale odor of hair. It all pressed in until I felt kind of nauseous. I didn't investigate any further. I couldn't. I just grabbed the bag, sealed it tighter, and threw it away immediately. And that was the end of it. But every time I cut my hair now, I can't stop thinking about that bag, sitting there for a week, quietly swelling with hair that wasn't mine. This happened years ago, back when I was working part-time at a concert hall and rehearsal studio. The place itself was notorious. Locals whispered about it constantly. It was the kind of building everyone in the area knew had a reputation. There had been so many reports of strange things happening there that they eventually even moved the location of the main entrance. That's how much of a fuss these rumors and stories caused. It was more than just an old building with creaks and drafts. It was a landmark of unease to many locals. And my job there was simple. After a concert, I would help guide the audience out, then stay behind to clean up the hall. I'd done it countless times before. That night, everything went as usual. The concert ended, the applause faded, and the crowd began to shuffle towards the exits. I positioned myself inside the hall, calling out from behind the audience. "Please, this way to the exit. Thank you for coming. The doors are just ahead." Step by step, I followed the flow of people, making sure that no one got lost or lingered. That was the rhythm: guide, reassure, and check the corners. And once I was certain that the very last person had left, I would step out myself. That night, I did just that. I was following the final row of people and stepped through the doorway. With one hand, I reached back to close the heavy door behind me, and just as I felt it press against the frame, something yanked my hair. Not just a gentle tug. It was sharp, deliberate, and forceful, like someone had grabbed a fistful of my hair and pulled it. My head jerked back with it. I was pulled so hard I stumbled to regain my balance. and in that instant my first thought wasn't ghost or weirdo or haunting or anything. I just assumed that I'd made a mistake. Maybe someone had been left behind in the hall and I was about to shut them in. Embarrassed, I blurted out, "I'm sorry," and I turned around quickly. I thought perhaps a late straggler had been caught by the door, and in their panic they grabbed onto anything in front of them, and that happened to be my hair, to stop the door from closing in on them. I mean, that made sense, at least it should have. But in the corner of my vision, just as I turned, I caught sight of something that I can't explain to this day. I saw an arm. It was dull, ashen grey, and it reached out from the narrowing gap of the door. Long and thin, almost boneless in the way it moved. In the next heartbeat, as the door eased shut, the arm slipped back inside with a smooth, sliding motion, as if it were never meant to be seen at all. I flung the door open immediately. My pulse hammered as I scanned the room. Rows of empty seats, the stage lights cooling, silence so thick it pressed on my ears. There was no one left inside, nothing that could have grabbed me. But the sensation lingered. My scalp still prickled where the hair had been pulled, and I remember when I touched the spot, I swore I could feel the strands of hair were bent out of place, like they remembered being gripped. After that night, my health began to decline, slowly at first, just fatigue, headaches, but it worsened. My hair, which had always been thick and dark, started shedding in clumps. Every shower, every morning, I would find long strands clogging the drains, tangling in my hands, spreading across the floor. It got so bad that I had to quit the job. Even now, years later, I can't forget the feeling of that hand pulling me back. That moment when something behind me decided it wasn't ready to let me go. I can't sleep lying on my back. Even on school trips where everyone else was sprawled out under the same roof, friends would look at me, lying face down, and ask, "Isn't that uncomfortable?" I'd heard the warnings too, TV shows saying that sleeping on your stomach distorts the bones in your face or puts too much pressure on your heart. But none of that mattered. Ever since that night, I've been unable to face the ceiling when I sleep. It was the summer holiday, 13 years ago. I was 9 years old, and my mother's family lived in Nagano. It had become a tradition for us to visit her parents every summer and winter break. That particular year, my younger brother was 6, and he had just started elementary school. Maybe because of that, our grandparents seemed especially warm, showering us with affection. My mother's childhood home was a sprawling single-story farmhouse. Even as a child, I thought it looked ancient, like it had been rooted in that soil for centuries. My grandparents worked the land, and the house carried the weight of their lives as farmers. Heavy beams, thick wooden pillars, and the smell of earth clinging to the floorboards. The timing of our visit would always coincide with the local Obon festival in summer. For me, those nights, lanterns swinging in the warm air, the sound of taiko drums echoing across the fields, were the highlight of going to Nagano. And on the night this story takes place, I am certain that it was during the festival. We came back late, well past 10, after pestering our grandfather into spoiling us with too much pocket money at the stalls. As soon as we returned, our mother hurried us into the bath. It wasn't a regular bathtub, it was a kind of makeshift goemon buro, a deep barrel heated from below. Steam clung to the walls as we scrubbed ourselves down. Clean and drowsy, my brother and I made our way to what we always called our room. It wasn't truly ours, of course. Most of the year it was just an attic storage space, cluttered with tools, boxes, and old futons. But whenever we visited, our grandmother would always clear it out and lay down bedding for us. It smelled faintly of mildew and dry wood, but to us, that only made it more exciting. It felt like a hideout, a secret base where only the two of us slept. That night my brother fell asleep quickly, breathing softly next to me. I lay awake as usual, listening to the muffled sounds drifting up from the first floor. My parents, my grandparents, even my uncle and aunt who lived nearby, their voices rose and fell, blurred by sake and laughter. I stayed there quietly in the dark, just listening, until, finally, their voices faded. The light under the staircase went out, and the silence that followed was absolute. And what came with it was a sudden fear. I was the only one awake in the whole house. The thought gnawed at me. The darkness pressed down harder, and I clenched my eyes shut, telling myself to just sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. My nerves were too sharp, my heart too quick. Maybe it was all the sweets I ate at the festival. So I lay there, waiting for dawn, afraid to open my eyes, afraid of what I might see. That was when I heard something. Not a voice exactly, more like a breathing sound. A strained, ragged sound. A woman's breath, shallow and pained, like someone struggling just beside me. "Hiroki?" I whispered, calling out my brother's name, but it wasn't him. The breathing was wrong, too low, too heavy with exhaustion. It felt closer to the cadence of an adult woman. I forced myself to open my eyes. There was nothing. There was no one there. Yet moments before, the exhale had been so close that I could feel it, brushing the hair across my forehead. No footsteps, no sound of movement, just silence again. My skin crawled as I scanned the room. But it was empty. Finally, in desperation, I shook my brother awake, even slapping him lightly until he grumbled and sat up, glaring at me. I begged him to stay awake, begged him to not let me lie there alone. Grudgingly, he agreed. I pushed our futons together and grabbed his hand, and I refused to let go until my chest stopped trembling. I needed to feel him there, needed the warmth of another living body to prove to myself that I wasn't alone. And at some point, my exhaustion dulled my panic. My eyes grew heavy, and I was about to drift into an uneasy sleep when something touched my face. Fine strands brushed across my cheek. Hair. Long hair. But no one in the house had hair like that. My mother's was cut short. My grandmother's, cropped and thin with age. Even my aunt wore hers, tied above her shoulders. And there was no one under that roof with hair long enough to fall across my skin in the dark. And besides, I hadn't heard a single step on the stairs. Whoever or whatever had entered had done so without a sound, and that thought made me tighten my grip around my little brother's hand. That was the part when I felt it. He squeezed back. His palm was slick with sweat. His voice broke the silence. "Ane-chan, Ane-chan." His small hand clutched around mine desperately. "Say it's over. Please say it's over. I don't want to do this anymore, Ane-chan. I don't want this anymore." His voice trembled high and weak, and I realized he was crying. And then the sound returned. That same woman's voice, close, broken, whispering symbols that at first made no sense at all. When the words finally shaped themselves in my mind, my chest seized with terror. Get out. Get out. That made me scream. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. Light spilled in through the cracks in the roof. For a moment I thought I must have just had a dream, some nightmare born from sleeping in an unfamiliar room. But when I looked at my brother, I hesitated. He claimed not to remember a thing from the moment I shook him awake. He said it was all blank. And yet, there was proof. In my right hand, clenched so tightly, my knuckles ached. were strands of hair. Several long black hairs that didn't belong to me and didn't belong to anyone else in the house. I know then that what happened was real. And that's why I can't sleep on my back, because if I face the ceiling, if I open my eyes in the dark, I'm terrified that it will happen again. So I bury myself against the futon, face down, because as long as I stay that way, I can at least avoid looking directly up and running into the chance of seeing that woman who left her hair behind in my hand. My family house is in the countryside, and it's an old, sprawling place. The main house is actually connected directly to the storehouse. The storehouse has always been a cool place, even in the middle of summer. On hot days, I'd often go there and take naps. I don't know if all storehouses are built this way, but ours has a section of floor with a kind of vent, a square frame of wooden slats laid over a woven mat, like a rough covering of straw or tatami. Air circulates up through it, and if you lie down on it, the breeze seeps through and cools you from below. It feels amazing. Though there's always that unsettling sense that if you shifted wrong, the whole frame might just give way beneath you. One day, stretched out there, half dozing, I noticed something I hadn't before. Up above, near the ceiling, or rather, the underside of the roof, there was a square panel cut into the beams. Later, I asked my grandmother about it. She told me that the attic had been used for storage, and heavier things were once hauled up through that opening with a pulley system. I hadn't known that. Curious, I asked her how to get up there, and she showed me. I climbed into the attic for the first time. Dust lay thick over everything. Mouse droppings scattered on the floor. The smell was stale, like paper that had been rotting for decades. But there were trunks, chests, old tansu drawers, objects piled up half forgotten. I rummaged through them. There were relics that made my stomach tighten. An old map. The Japanese Empire dyed blood red across the continent. Worn leg wraps, gaiters, the kind soldiers used to wear. They'd belonged to my grandfather. Holding them in my hands, I felt caught between amusement and unease. Each object seemed to breathe a life I couldn't see anymore, like voices still trapped in the dust. I lingered too long, maybe, lost in the past, but when I finally made my way back down, I noticed something I hadn't before. The entrance I had climbed up was not the pulley hole in the ceiling I'd seen earlier, but a separate hatch designed for ladders. This one could be locked from below, and around its edges, gouged deep into the wood, were scratches, long, furious scratch marks. I crouched to look closer, and they weren't random. They looked deliberate, like someone had clawed desperately at the floor, trying to dig their way out. The marks were small, much smaller than my hand. 4 or 5 fingers had raked the wood again and again. I asked my grandmother about it, but she only frowned, shaking her head, saying she had no idea. After that, I began looking more carefully whenever I went back up there, and one day I found something else. Caught on a high ceiling beam was a long strand of hair, black, brittle with age, but unmistakable. The beam was high, at least 2.5 meters up. You'd have to climb or stand on something tall to reach it. No one just bumped their head on a place like that. And when I looked again, I saw it was directly above the pulley opening, the place where the heavy loads were once lifted up. Of course, it made sense that the pulley rope might catch loose strands if someone was hauling bundles of clothes or bedding. That's the explanation I told myself. But paired with the scratches, around that locked hatch, the image became harder to dismiss. Maybe the pulley rope had been used for something else, but what connection would it have to the hair? Unless someone hung there. I pushed that thought to the attic of my mind. I didn't like that. Sometimes I wonder whose hair that was, whose small hands tore at the wood until the nails split. Relics of war were up there, maps of conquest, a soldier's gear. The attic was a grave of forgotten things, and maybe among them was something no one wanted to remember. Let me share a story my grandfather once told me. It goes back to when he was a child. My grandfather grew up in a small, isolated village, deep in the mountains. The villagers lived almost entirely from forestry. They would forage, grow crops, and hunt. For them, the mountain was everything, as vital and familiar as a parent. But even there, high up in the dark ridges, where the cedars crowded thick and mist clung for days, there was a landlord, a man who lived not by cutting or hauling timber, but in a grand estate at the edge of the village. Unlike the others, he did not labor in the forest. He lived comfortably, almost lazily, separated from the struggles of those around him. On the surface, the village life seemed pastoral, simple, even idyllic. But it had rules, strange, rigid rules, whispered to children before they could even read. Rules my grandfather learned by heart, long before he understood what they meant. On the third day of every month, no villager was allowed to approach the landlord's estate, save for the appointed hair handler, Kami Torishi. No one was allowed to speak to the guests who came and went on those days. And every month, like clockwork, strangers would arrive from outside the valley, well-dressed, refined men and women, always arriving in the mornings and gone again before dusk. For a child, it was just another fact of life. My grandfather never questioned it. You didn't go near the house on the third, and you didn't call out to the visitors. That was the law. And then came the outsider. One day, a man appeared from beyond the mountains, a drifter. He built himself a crude hut not far from the landlord's estate. Suspicious, the villagers gathered and argued over who would explain the rules to him, and finally, it was decided that my grandfather's own father would go. So my great-grandfather walked into the hut and laid down the law. On the third, stay away, don't interfere. This is a kind of local law, and if you break this, terrible things will follow. He pressed the warning into the drifter as firmly as he could. I once asked my grandfather why they simply didn't chase the man away. Wouldn't have that been safer? He shook his head and said, "Half the people in that village were drifters once. Nobody thought in terms of throwing someone out like that." So the drifter was left to stay. He nodded and he listened, and he agreed to the rules. And then the third day of the month came. That morning, 3 people arrived. A young couple, finely dressed, and a middle-aged man. Strangers like always, carrying themselves with an air of wealthy households. The reason they came, my grandfather said, was the law of hair gathering. It was a ritual passed down through the landlord's family, a kind of exorcism, a way of stripping away curses and evil spirits that cling and hold on. The method was unsettling, and I don't fully understand it, but the evil, it was said, could be drawn out of a person in the form of hair. But it wasn't hair from their head, but strands extracted deep within the body, pulled from the belly itself. A grotesque procedure. Once removed, the hair carried all the malice with it, and it was the duty of the hair handler, a villager chosen and initiated by the landlord, to take that hair into the mountains and seal it away. That day was no different. As evening fell, a small paper-wrapped bundle was placed quietly at the estate's back door. The hair handler picked it up without a word and carried it towards the mountain path. But the drifter couldn't resist. Despite the warnings, he crept through the thicket near the estate, hiding among the trees to spy on what was happening. He saw the hair handler take the bundle, and in his ignorance, he thought that it must contain something valuable. Money perhaps, offerings. So he followed the man into the mountains. The shrine stood halfway up the slope, a lonely wooden structure half swallowed by the forest. It was there that the hair was sealed. The drifter waited until the hair handler finished, sliding the bundle inside and leaving. Then, when the coast was clear, the drifter crept into the shrine and snatched it. He unwrapped it, and inside was no treasure, no coins, no silk, just a clump of hair, wet, matted, soaked with blood. Disgusted, he hurled it away into the trees behind him. The next day, his hut burned down. He managed to survive, stumbling out of the flames, but the landlord summoned him almost instantly. He hadn't spoken a word of what he'd done. Still, the landlord's eyes fixed on him and saw something clinging to his body. "If you want to live," the landlord said coldly, "you will inherit the role of hair handler, and if you refuse, then your life is forfeit." The drifter refused, and by nightfall, he was cast out of the village. A few days later, the landlord's estate went up in flames. The whole family perished inside. In the ashes, a body of a man was found, believed to be the drifter. The villagers said that the villagers decided he must have set the fire, but failed to escape. Possibly as some sort of revenge against being thrown out of the village. That was the official story anyway. But soon after, when the hair handler went up to the shrine, he found it had been torn apart, and the bundles within were all gone. And then the whispers began. The drifter hadn't just simply fled. He had broken into the shrine and taken the hair. He had brought curses, the hatred, the restless spirits, all back to the landlord's house, and together they were consumed by the fire. The landlord's line ended that night. With no more ritual, no more visitors, the money stopped flowing into the village. Families left one by one, houses rotted, and in time the place withered into nothing but an abandoned husk. Grandfather would tell me this story while running a hand across his bald scalp. He would laugh, but there would be no humor in it. It would be hollow. And ever since then, he said, he has feared hair more than anything else. This happened when I was back living alone in a certain apartment building. I'm writing this from my phone, so apologies if it's hard to read. Every house has a light switch, right? The kind you press and it makes that little click. These days there's all sorts of types, but the ones in my apartment were the most ordinary you can imagine. One day, by chance, the cover around one of the switches broke off. It didn't fall apart completely. The switch itself was still firmly fixed to the wall with its bracket, so I could use it as usual. But with the cover gone, the inside was exposed. I could see the wiring and the empty dark space behind it, and it bothered me because dust and who knows what else could get in there, so I figured I should fix it. When I tried to reattach the cover, I noticed something strange, tangled among the wires in the back. At first I thought it might just be insulation, or maybe lint. Curious, I pinched it and gave it a tug. It was hair, a long strand of human hair. I froze for a moment, and then I tugged again. More came, and then more. I kept pulling, and it kept sliding out. like something being dragged out from a drain. Long black strands, knotted and clumped together. They didn't stop. By the time I was finished, I had pulled out enough to fill a small convenience store shopping bag. I was shaken, yeah, but nothing actually happened. No sounds, no drafts. Nothing paranormal, right? So I stuffed it into a bag, carried it outside, and I threw it away, and I pushed the cover back into place. But the cover had warped when it broke. It didn't fit quite right anymore. It rattled loosely against the wall, and there was a gap at the edge. A week or so later, I happened to glance at it again, and I saw that something black dangled from the gap. A clump of hair. It was pushing its way out. I pulled at it. Again, it slid free in long, wet, soaking strands, dragging and knotting against each other. By the time I was done, I had gathered another bagful, about the same amount as the first time. At that point, I couldn't ignore it. I went to the building manager and asked about the history of the apartment. Who lived there before me? He told me that yes, a young woman had rented the place before I moved in. Nothing unusual about her though. She was just an ordinary tenant. Except one day, she vanished. She completely disappeared, and she was never found. No notes, no sign of leaving, and after months, her belongings were packed up and sent back to her family home, and the room was put up for sale again. After that, no matter how much I pulled out, the hair always came back. Within 2 or 3 weeks, strands would creep from the gap in the cover, hanging down like something trying to escape. I gave up dealing with it. By the end, I didn't even bother touching it. I just left it hanging there until the day I moved out. And that was it. There was no sleep paralysis, no footsteps in the night, no whispering voices, just the hair. And even now I sometimes wonder about that room, and whether the hair is still there, waiting behind the walls. This happened 10 years ago. Back when I was a student, I rented a small one-room apartment in Shimotakaido, close to the university. The place faced Kaido, a big road that cuts through the city, and there, right above it, loomed the Shuto Expressway. I lived on the second floor, but even during the day the expressway blocked out most of the light. The room was always dim. It was always half dark, and that made me want to keep the lights on no matter what. Still, the rent was cheap for the area, and that was enough for me, so I signed the contract at the real estate office without hesitation, and a week later arranged for my belongings to be moved in. On moving day, I came up from Kanagawa. The movers told me that they couldn't deliver my things until 6 in the evening. By the time the truck arrived, the sun had already set. The room was pitch dark. Electricity hadn't been turned on yet, so the only light came from the faint glow of a street lamp outside, spilling in weakly through the window. The movers unloaded everything in a rush and left, and I didn't really have the energy to unpack in the gloom, so I pulled out just the mattress and laid it in the center of the room. With nothing else to do, I just laid down and tried to get to sleep early. The next morning, sunlight poured in, unfiltered through the bare window. No curtains yet, and it woke me up nice and early. And when I looked around my room, my breath caught in my throat. The floor around the mattress was covered. An overwhelming amount of hair. Black strands scattered so thickly they looked like a carpet, stretching in every direction around where I had been sleeping. And you want to know what's really frightening? 6 months later, when I was moving out, the real estate agent came for the inspection. He looked around and casually said, "Of course, with all our tenants, we'll be deducting the cleaning fee from your deposit." Cleaning fee? If anyone deserved to be paid for cleaning, it was me. Well, anyway, that's where my story ends, but there is more. A friend of mine told me her boyfriend once lived in the same apartment. He had been a student at university, just like me. And this was about 10 years ago, roughly about the same time I was there. She even visited him in that room a few times. Later, after he moved out, a student from another university moved in. For a while, that apartment gained a kind of notoriety between the two campuses, as everybody whispered about that apartment. Her boyfriend told her this. One night, he woke up in the dark, half asleep, fumbling to get to the bathroom, reaching out blindly. His hand brushed against something. It was hair, a head of hair. He said the texture was unmistakable, coarse, gritty strands slipping through his fingers. He instinctively grabbed it, thinking maybe he'd knocked into a wig or a pillow or something. But it resisted. He realized his hand was gripping what felt like the top of a human's head. Confused, he tried to pull it closer to see, and in that instant, the head shook itself violently, like a person turning away, like someone saying, "Stop it, cut it out." And then it jerked out of his grip and vanished into the dark. Another time, the toilet clogged. He called a plumber. The man reached into the drain and pulled out a fist-sized clump of human hair, packed tight, slimy with water. And another night, he was sitting in front of the TV. The fan was running beside him, stirring the air. Out of nowhere, he felt it. Something had pressed against the fan. Not an object. Not the normal rattle of paper, but the pressure of something with weight. He didn't turn, he just leaned over and unplugged the cord from the wall. Immediately, the presence seemed to recoil. He described it like this. It was as if I could feel the thing flustered, confused, like it was muttering, "Eh? What? No, stop." But not with words, just the sense of something reacting. That apartment in Shimotakaido has tenants come and go, but everyone who stayed there carried the same story when they left. The room was never really empty, and the hair was always there.